And if we don't get to your questions while we're live, we will follow up after the meeting. So, all right, let's dive in. So again, welcome to Better Careers, Better Lives. This time we're live. We've done this in the past recorded, but this season we're going to be live. And this series features leaders in education, technology, skilled trades industries, and how they're making an impact by providing pathways to better careers and better lives. I'm your host this season, Vanessa Myers, Director of Education and Workforce Development at Interplay Learning. And today we're hearing the origin story of workforce development expert Ron Stefanski. Welcome, Ron.
It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Of course. So Ron, I'm so excited that you're joining us today because you're a dear friend, a former colleague, and I think you always have really interesting perspective for anyone that's following you on social media about the intersection between education, technology, and workforce development. But for folks that don't know you, could you share a little background?
Sure. I am, first of all, Vanessa, it is so great to be together with you. I am a huge fan, as you know, and so it's a delight to be here today and to share whatever insights I may have. You know, my background is from the center of the Midwest. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, went off to the University of Michigan, and on my way to finding myself a year off before I thought I wanted to go to law school, I answered an ad for a textbook publishing rep job, and it took my career in an entirely different direction. I never ended up going to law school. I ended up pursuing a career in educational publishing and then in educational technology. And I've never looked back. I've always, there were a couple of years where I thought, oh, am I supposed to be doing something? But I kind of subscribe to the view that if you do something you love, everything else will fall in shape. And I think that's how my career has certainly gone. And I've enjoyed every different role I've had.
So to give people a sense of you outside of your work life, if money were no object and you weren't doing what you're doing today, what would you be doing? I think I know the answer, but I want to see what it is.
I would be writing and speaking. I'm a storyteller. So okay. I love the platform I've been given to speak and to write and to share. So I would be doing that. I also have a yearly love my nieces to pieces getaway weekend sailing here in Detroit on the Detroit River. So I would spend more time with my extended family, and then I would spend more time abroad. I have an Austrian family. I was an exchange student 40 years ago, and I'm still close with the family, so I'd spend more time with them. That's where I would go.
Yeah, my money was on sailing, but not so
yes.
Storyteller either, because I know, we've spent I've heard a lot of great stories with you around the bar, so not trying to do that either.
Well, sailing, I feel like sailing's in my blood, so that's just sort of a given, I will always find my way to water,
Yeah. All right, so you grew up in Detroit, which is a very industrial city, obviously historically dependent on a large manufacturing economy and workforce, and you've chosen to stay there as well. How did growing up in Detroit shape how you thought about your own career?
Well, it shaped me in my early years, my college years, because I came from a second generation immigrant family. So my grandparents and my parents were constantly imposing the idea that I had to go, and do better than they did, which for them meant, my grandparents were sixth grade educated. My parents were high school educated. That meant I needed to go to college or beyond. And so there was always sort of an expectation. I grew up in a very ethnic neighborhood in Detroit on the east side near Hamtramck. So it was a blend of Italian, German, Polish immigrants, and African Americans who were part of the Great Migration from the Jim Crow South to the north to factories and industrial places where there were good paying jobs. That's how my grandparents ended up here in Detroit. And they left the coal mines of Ohio after boarding a ship and coming over here and landing there originally from Poland. And then they made their way up here when they saw the amazing $5 a day wages that were being offered to work in a factory. So my whole family had a strong history in the trades and in automotive manufacturing. And all my grandparents thought the height of accomplishment was to become a tradesman, learn a trade, have a backup, learn a trade. So my one grandfather was a millwright, and he was, very, very proud of the work he did.
Mhm. You have some pretty powerful stories around why you believe so strongly in the role of education and changing people's lives. Can you share some of those stories?
I think that, I went off and did the college thing and went to New York and became an editor, met my wife. We ended up taking our jobs back to the Midwest, and we're living, just a normal life in educational publishing. We were both in the business and enjoying it and having a good time and living our lives and getting ready to start a family. And then life as I know it kind of turned itself upside down. I was at a sales meeting for John Wiley and Sons in Minnesota, and I got a call from the Detroit Police Department letting me know that my grandmother had passed away. And I found it odd that they had my number, which they had gotten from my wife. And they went on to say, we're not sure that she had died of natural causes. As it turned out, my grandmother was murdered, and that was a deal breaker. I mean, it was a complete life changer. When something like that happens, looking back, the laws of physics no longer apply, right? Vanessa, you have up is no longer up, down is somewhere sideways. It's just completely discombobulating. We were 7 months pregnant at the time. And so we endured a public trial and hearings during that pregnancy, and and trying to get back on track with a job and traveling and all that stuff. So it was a remarkably distraught time. And as I pulled away from that, and as I started to kind of climb out of that, dark hole that you end up in circumstances like that, I realized that in many respects, the work on a broad level was somehow important. The work that I was doing in education, because as it turned out, the person who killed and assaulted my grandmother was a 14-year-old high school dropout. And so I kept thinking, wow, I wonder what this kid's life would have been like if his parents hadn't given him out for adoption. The day they did, he left the school system and never went back. And so I thought about that for a long time. And then over time, I pivoted my career into that space. I thought, if we're building educational products like, textbooks and then digital tools and things like that, I thought, I want to be spending it on tools that help us give more people access to education, because the absence of it, I used to talk with pharmaceutical reps all the time, friends who were in sales, and they'd say, well, at the end of the day, what we do doesn't kill anyone. And I started thinking, wait, what we don't do could kill someone. I mean, you never think about education as being that impactful until it happens and your life is turned completely upside down. And as I dove into the story and as I learned more about my grandma Vicky's killer, the more it became clear that education would have played a profoundly impactful role in this person's life. And so that's kind of where you reach a crossroads at a moment like that. And that's the crossroads I took, is that I think I can do more in education. I think I can do it more directly, helping people to find a path that works for them. Doesn't necessarily have to be college, but it should be a path that leads to a meaningful, life-sustaining, family-supporting, purposeful job.
Yeah,
or career.
absolutely. Yeah. And I know you have a really fantastic painting of your grandmother in your home office behind you to memorialize her. And you've had some long stints at Borders, at Cengage. I know you spent time at Penn Foster as well. And these are obviously major companies that are really focused on creating better outcomes through content and through education. And obviously to the masses, having that impact, like you said, you and I know each other through Cengage. And I remember that phrase you were just talking about, people saying it's not brain surgery, but obviously they do have a lot of impact. So what are some of the things that you think those companies are doing that do have impact? What are the biggest levers they're pulling?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that a number of companies are pursuing Penn Foster, Smart Horizons, Excel Academy. There are companies out there who have developed a full bore high school diploma program or high school completion program. And they're all of a different sort than the traditional compulsory age curriculum that most students get K through 12. The programs are designed around adult learners. So it's a different curriculum and it's a different academic or pedagogical approach. And I think that's so fundamental and so game changing. And I'll tell you why. I think that I've spent a lot of time in my own city becoming immersed and involved with people in the workforce ecosystem, mayor's office, local workforce board, local companies that see workforce development as key to their success, thriving in the city. And I think what I've learned from all those experiences is that we're chasing our tails to try to help get people into certain jobs, maybe an apprenticeship, maybe this. But fundamentally, if you look at the numbers, we're missing a big hole. And that big hole is filled with 40 million adults. I've never asked anyone the question, how many high school dropouts do you think are in the United States today? And most people have never, ever thought of a number bigger than 5 or 10 million. We have 40 million adults, Vanessa, that don't have a basic high school education. That means in my neighborhood, I live in the riverfront downtown Detroit. That means in my neighborhood alone, within the city limits, 25% of our adult population over 25 doesn't have a high school diploma. 25%. That's over 200,000 people. Now, when you talk about economic growth and filling the gaps, the talent gaps, when you talk about creating sustainable, inclusive growth, I'm a big advocate, as is the World Economic Forum, around the notion of stakeholder capitalism, where companies are forced or endowed with the responsibility to look beyond just the shareholders, look at the communities they serve, look at all the constituents from employees to customers to communities they're involved in. And I think that makes for a more inclusive, prosperous company. I think that model is much more sustainable than the kind of reckless capitalism that we're seeing on display in some large company cases. And I think it all stems from finding good people to fill good jobs and to sustain that economic recovery for more people. It's no longer we help some people. We need to help everyone until we close that gap much more significantly than we have over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So as we think about those students, that are in high school, that are in middle school, and how we open up opportunities for them, what do you think is the role of career exploration in making that next generation aware of trades, and also is what we're doing adequate?
Yeah, I think we know what we're doing now is not adequate. I think we have to have many, many more immersion opportunities for young people starting in middle school to expose them to many more different kinds of jobs. You have Road Trip Nation taking people across the country and exposing them to jobs that are well paying but don't require a college education. You have other organizations doing that. I think that's really important to give kids exposure to what's out there. So I think that's one thing. Our former state superintendent, two of them, Cheryl Ailes and Tom Watkins, have both advocated for abolishing senior year as we know it in the high school curriculum and turning it into a service year or a guided learning gap year before they go somewhere else, and they would do some kind of service or work in a company or learn a trade or do something, and their senior year would end and culminate with a project-based learning archive of some sort of asset, a report or a project or something. I think there's a lot of merit in that because it exposes students to what's out there, what's in the real world, what they may have interest in. It gets them exposed to people who are doing the jobs that they may think are interesting. I've been privileged to go to a number of different advanced manufacturing summits over the past year. And I keep thinking to myself, I hear manufacturers telling me all the time, the number one problem is talent. The talent pipeline is in crisis. And then I go to these conferences and I am gobsmacked by new technologies. robotic limbs and 3D printed rockets and automobiles. I mean, it's getting extraordinary what the technology is doing now. And we see that just in the last couple of months with Chat GPT. It's just getting everyone buzzing. I think we have to expose students to that. If you come home and someone shows up at a career fair and they say, yeah, I'm an engineer and this is what I do, you know, business of manufacturing is making stuff. And I think that is a high appeal job. It's not the factory job that my grandmother and grandfather had. You go into a factory now and it looks like a laboratory. People, it's not the grease filled floors and sparks flying that it was. Even when I went to college and I was a press operator, and that's how I made my way through school. It's a different factory environment than it was even then.
Yeah. And I think related to this, I was reading an article in the Hechinger report yesterday, and it was talking about this debate between how we created, or what the purpose of education is, and how we create well-rounded citizens. So when we think about well-rounded citizens, maybe we think of humanities, politics, art, and is the purpose of education to do that, or is it to create career pathways? Is the bias more economic? What is your perspective on that? Do you think career exploration is at odds with creating well-rounded citizens?
Not at all. No. I think that it has to be an and, not an or.
Yeah.
I think, we learn how to digest facts with math and the sciences and the other hardcore disciplines. And we learn how to think creatively and how to collaborate with humankind by indulging in the arts and humanities. And so I can't imagine a world in which we make one or the other the exclusive domain of what we consider an educated person. There are a number of people that go through a liberal arts degree in colleges now, and they come out somewhat rudderless. And I call professors on that and say, in some way, shape, or form, some of your classes need to culminate with some kind of capstone experience where a student should be able to come out of a liberal arts college with a liberal arts degree in history or geography or social sciences, art history, and be able to say, how does that connect me to a job? And if you can't answer that question, you need to go back and read some more. You need to go back and talk to some more people, because I think, when I look at it, liberal arts majors are in big demand in tech now. Why? Because there's a lot of pernicious global threats, cyber threats, things like that require complex thinking. And those skills are often enhanced by a broad-minded, broad-based liberal arts education. I think we've also reached a point, Vanessa, where the threats to democracy across the globe are real, and they're not going away anytime soon. And what I see, and what I think many people see, is the danger of being ill-prepared to understand how our democracy works. Out of ignorance comes a lot of grief, and I think we need to close that gap. So I think you can't take humanities out. At the same time, we need to power up. We need to accept the fact that some of our students, some of our children are not as well prepared for the 21st century 5G wired, globally interdependent, technology-enabled, workforce augmented world of work and learning. It's just no longer the case that one size fits all. And so we need to be prepared to keep giving people doses of the education experiences they need to allow them to pivot and move through that career journey.
Yeah, and just thinking back to those numbers you shared around high school dropout rates nationally, I'm thinking about accessibility and how we create more accessibility in communities. I know through you, I've learned a lot about libraries, right? You have a lot of connection there. So you spend a lot of time working with people in the library space. What do you think the role of libraries is in creating accessibility to opportunities in communities?
I think that the libraries in America today are run by an amazing group of superheroes. I cannot say enough good things about the library directors and CEOs that are out there running our public libraries now. They form such a broad, diverse group of talents. It's stunning. And they're doing so many amazing things to expand the library's reach well beyond checking out books or even checking out digital materials. They're doing programming now. If you go to Queens Public Library, they have the largest adult education program in the country. They have over 500,000 people going through it. That's huge, right? So libraries are understanding their roles and responsibilities really well. And I think they're also well positioned to do that because they are the good housekeeping seal of verified facts and information. And we're in a world where we've introduced, naively introduced the notions of fake news, alternative facts. And those are things we need to squelch. And the only way to squelch them is to help people understand how important it is to have facts driving our decisions.
Mhm. Do you think that people in communities are aware that libraries say that one of their leading goals is to support employment, right? They're very interested in how they support career entry in those pathways. Do you think people in the community, their patron outside of maybe their patrons, are aware of that role?
I think, I worked with public libraries in official capacity for almost 15 years. And what I saw during that time is that our librarians and our library facilities and collections were in many cases a well-kept secret. And
Mhm.
I think that needs to change. And in fact, one of the driving forces behind my disrupted podcast, the public library edition, is to get librarians out there talking about some of the things they do. In our first episode, we have a drone tour through the Boston Public Library. It's amazing. You look at that place and you're going, wow, the next time I go to Boston, I need to go in that building just to see it. It's extraordinary. And what's inside, on the shelves is even more extraordinary. So I think that our libraries have taken the mantle and established themselves as verified vaults of, battle tested, fact informed information. So I think they've done an extraordinary job there. I think they're doing an incredible job of expanding the reach and scope of their activities to serve their populations uniquely and diversely, community by community. At the same time, I think we need to do more to promote the cause of public libraries because I think sometimes, people just don't understand how much a library can do for their children going to school, for themselves in a job search, or for just their own enrichment and education. But I defy anyone to go to Austin or Boston without going to their central library because those two libraries, among many, many others, Los Angeles Public Library. I mean, these are just incredible places to go. The Austin Public Library is the newest of those three I just mentioned, and it's extraordinary. I mean, it's a green facility that goes up, 13, 14 stories, has an outdoor, green area where you can sit and take your computer and have wireless. I mean, um, it's a place where you can, freely learn. I often think about Andrew Carnegie, who was during his time the most wealthy man on the planet. And he recognized that he would be vilified in the afterlife by people remembering him as a robber baron and as a real aggressive builder of businesses and not necessarily of people. So he devoted the last part of his life to giving away his money, and he built the Carnegie Library system. And if you go to libraries across the country, you'll find Carnegie Libraries still standing. And they're, in many cases they were small, and so they don't serve current needs or current audiences, but they're part and parcel of a broader expansion of libraries. And I think the power of a Carnegie Library is amazing because he thought you could get your whole education, you could get the equivalent of a college education to spending time in that building. And that's still true today, hundreds of years later. So I think there's a lot to be said for carrying that legacy forward.
Yeah, it's as I've worked more with libraries, what has really struck me is that I think historically we've thought of libraries as these buildings of books, right? And number one, they're not that anymore. But number two, how plugged in they are to their communities. They have connections in the judicial system, the education system, workforce boards, if you know your librarians and you know your library directors and leadership, they know everyone else. What do you think what can they do to make sure that they're getting the word out there and that they're keeping their relevance in the community?
I think we need to aid and abet their efforts, and like I said, my podcast is one small, tiny thing, but I think it's a way to get that storytelling going because, not only does Los Angeles Public Library with John Zabo, the city librarian, offer a high school diploma program, but they also host a library sponsored graduation ceremony for all those adults that is in every single respect just as exalted and celebratory as any large auditorium high school. And whenever I've gone to these high school events, I'm always just touched by the extended family that shows up, for a 45-year-old person who is a single parent. And, we need to debunk the myth that high school dropouts are gangbangers and pregnant teens. Many of the dropouts that are out there are from immigrant families and immigrant families that had to find some way to support themselves when life happened, catastrophic illness, catastrophic financial difficulties. And that's who's out there. The library, more than any other institution, I think, has really worked very, very assiduously to bring them in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that in the libraries that we're working with, they have a role to play in career exploration as well, right? Not just obviously there is that specific occupational training that they are doing or helping to get a GED, as you were saying, but also increasingly they're interested in how do they help patrons that are coming in that want to explore various careers, right? And then they also need to figure out what the steps are that they can take to pursue those.
I think they're also, I think that's absolutely right. I think they're also places that are community gathering spaces. And so I think there's nothing quite like going to the library and just hearing someone, give a talk about a particular career or particular career exploration, having someone come in and talk to people about, when you see people in the library applying for jobs, they're not people who are augmenting their search from an executive search firm, and then they're going to look at the library for other things. These are people who worked in mom and pop businesses, small enterprises, and may have worked there for many, many years and never had to do so much as use a computer or, type up a resume. And now, technology has just taken that whole career search and explore it to new depths and new technology enhancements. So the library is the one that helps people sort that out. And I think that that's a critical role that the libraries play. And then the second place where they play a huge role is in programming. It used to be that a lot of the programs had to do with summer reading programs for kids and things like that. Now you go into libraries and there's a lot more programming around adult and continuing education. I think that's fantastic because there are a lot of ways to bring quality online and hybrid experiences into the library using meeting space that's available. If you look at the renovations of libraries like Columbus Metro with Pat Lisinski, if you look at Austin, if you look at some of the other libraries that have undergone recent, expansions or renovations, what you see them doing is making many, many more opportunities available for people to congregate in small groups or larger groups. And, the space is flexibly designed to accommodate different size organizations or people coming in, from the community. And I think that's exactly what we need is to, break bread. I was at Houston Public Library, Dr. Lawson, who's another amazing librarian, had a citizenship program where you actually adopted a person who was studying for their citizenship. And you just told him about, you just had a conversation with him over coffee. And people love that program. It was just so eye-opening to meet someone and, hear about someone from a different walk of life, a different part of the world, right? So it was, and what they found is that it was critically important to both parties, not just the immigrant looking for help, but the person who is native, or had been in the U.S. longer was on the other side of that conversation. It was as informative and as impactful for them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we've done a deep dive on libraries because I agree with you. I think they're just providing a tremendous service, to our communities. That's really, I think, not as visible as it should be. I just want to take a step back. Our mission statement is better careers and better lives, and you obviously have a unique background given your time in Detroit, what you've chosen for a career. What's your take on the relationship between one's career and one's life?
I think they're inextricably entwined with each other. I think that what I have found is, when I go to career fairs or I go to, Skilled Trade Summit here in Detroit recently, what you find is that people derive a lot of purpose and value in work, and they acquire important traits, dignity, self-respect, those kinds of things, because they're not just being handed something, they're giving back. And the earlier people learn to look at work that way, the healthier their lives are, I think. But it's also important to help people understand they have skills. We just need to find out what they are and then, nurture that flame, pour fuel on it and accelerate it and help them accelerate it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think one size fits all. I think in the last 10 to 15 years, we've downplayed careers and CTE programs across the K-12 system. And I think it's been to our detriment. When I talk to people, and this is a common experience now, just getting home repairs now has become a thing, right? Because there aren't enough tradespeople out there. And that's quality work, that's skilled work, and that's good paying work. My nephew and godson, Colin, is someone who just didn't see himself in school. And he went to a 4-year liberal arts college for a couple months and knew that wasn't right for him. And he went off on his own and got himself signed up for an apprenticeship and as an electrician. And seeing what that's done to him is just so powerful. You're taking a young man that felt out of place when all his friends were filling out college applications. And now he's there with a job where he's making really, really good salary. He has no student debt. And he loves what he's doing. And it's reflected in his charisma and his body language. It's so exciting to see how he's developed, from the young boy that was, that we all assumed for many years was going to go on to college. And I would say that would have been a mistake if he had pursued that.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a similar story when I was trying to decide what I was going to do going into college, and I wanted to go into pre-vet. And my dad was really discouraging. He said, I think you should do English. And pre-vet, I had the grades for it, but I didn't love chemistry. I didn't love biology, but I thought I was going to love being a vet, right? And my dad discouraged me. And I was so frustrated with him at the time. Like, why don't you believe in me? But he said, Vanessa, if you're good at it and you love what you're doing, you're going to enjoy your job a lot more. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen in working with people who, for whom college, a traditional kind of 4-year liberal arts pathway is not the right path for them. It's often because they're hands-on visual learners. That's what engages them. Solving those problems is what turns them on. And so those career paths, it makes sense to me, would be so much more engaging and fulfilling for them than, the English lit major that you and I did. They don't want to read Shakespeare for for months, do they?
That's right. I have a friend who recently moved to the US and actually moved to Detroit. He was spellbound by the whole Detroit versus everybody campaign and thought, wow, that'd be a cool place to live. And he came here and was monumentally successful. And now he's the CEO of an automotive technology company called Anchor Automotive. And Jose is just so impassioned about helping his employees and to find a place where they can where they can develop, where they can learn more. And I think employers have done a really, really solid job in recent years of investing more in the education of the broader base of their employees at the entry level and the customer facing side of it. It seemed like 10 years, 15 years ago in this business, you would see learning and development organizations within companies focused almost exclusively on high potential candidates. How do we get them their MBA? How do we accelerate them with another class or two in executive education? And now you have companies that are just educating hundreds of thousands of people, and they're more basic education. And I think there's been a huge paradigm shift among companies. I think companies recognize that we shifted the risk of a college expense or a post-secondary expense for school to the individual, and we're breaking their backs. And so companies have stepped in to say, we want good people. We're going to have to help them with this so that they're not only good, but they're loyal and they're engaged with us. And so I think education is going to be a game changer for many companies that are really fulfilling that mission by providing more educational opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see this shift to employer-sponsored apprenticeship, right? Increasingly, there's a lot of funding, as you know, moving into apprenticeship right now. And then, of course, like you were saying, employer-sponsored education as a benefit. I know that you've been involved with some companies who are really, on the forefront of that movement 10 years or so ago. I think McDonald's, for example, I know that you partnered with them when they were first starting to roll out those kind of programs. What do you think?
McDonald's?
Why were they inspired back then? Because that was really kind of cutting edge at the time.
Well, I had an opportunity in the middle of working with them to meet and spend, I asked the chief learning officer if I could spend some time with him. He gave me 90 minutes on his calendar, and I said, that's a lot of time. I'm really grateful, but why did you volunteer that much time? He said, because what we're going to do is going to be so important, and it's going to change millions of lives. And I said, let's talk. And the more we talked, the more he uncovered the math behind it. McDonald's was employing upwards of 1 million people a year. And they were also recruiting and hiring and training 1 million people a year, which meant their turnover was in excess of 100%. And I said, well, don't you have metrics around how to bring those numbers down, how to increase retention? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And Rob said, we've always seen it as a cost of doing business. But McDonald's fundamentally changed its employment approach and did so in a remarkably successful way. They built a brand around workforce, Archways to Opportunity, which provides people with high school completion, college assistance, counseling assistance, and English Under the Arches is for English as a second language. 40% of McDonald's employees at that time were Hispanic and non-native speaking, English wasn't their first language. So I think that was a paradigm shift away from accepting that we're going to hire these people at the entry level. They're not going to stick around very much. We don't have to invest in them because they're not going to be around long enough. And that all changed when McDonald's started putting people through these programs. And you go back there now and talk to Lisa Schumacher, who heads up education for McDonald's, extraordinary leader in education and employee as a, and education as a benefit programs. I mean, she and her team basically invented that. And, when you listen to her talk about that, they see themselves for what they are, America's best first job. They don't have expectations that someone in their 40s will be working for them, making food behind a counter. But they do imagine that they can take people who are maybe, their path took a turn. And so they're in their 20s and they don't have a high school diploma, but they want to work and they want to kind of figure out how they can get back on track. McDonald's takes those people and they give them soft skills, working skills in a fast-paced restaurant environment. Then they give them all the assistance they need to complete their education wherever they're at, whether or not it's high school completion or college or community college associate degrees. And they've had 75,000 people enrolled in that program. And I just think what they're doing is amazing. And it started with the CEO who said, the only way we're going to grow our brand in this country is if people respect the quality of our food sourcing and they respect the way we treat people. And those were the two missions 10 years ago that have defined that. And
Mhm.
other companies have taken a while, but a lot of other companies have followed suit. And it's impressive to see how many companies have stepped into that. And now it's table stakes for recruiting people.
It's interesting. So when we first started talking, we were talking about some of the organizations that you were with early in your career. A lot of those at the time, were book based. And then you were also sharing some of the various events you've gone to recently, where there's AI and there's 3D printing. What are your observations about the role of technology and workforce development? How is that pushing this industry?
I think it's happening in profound ways that will inspire us and freak us out in equal measure in the years to come. And I think sometimes I talk to people about the role that technology plays in that intersection. That's what I call disrupt ed, is that nexus between workforce and technology and education, and how they're all being disrupted, right? We don't know if it's important for this particular person to get a college degree. That was never a question when I grew up. I was going to college. I was going to do better than my immigrant family. That was just a given. And then when I was done, I was going to go work for a company and spend 30 years there, and then take my marbles and go home. That's not the case anymore. And so technology is helping us. Well, it's helping to accelerate that trend, but at the same time, it's also providing a lot of opportunities for people. And I think that's the key, is we have to take the anxiety out of the conversation and expose people to some of these technologies and how they work. And then as a consequence of that, people will be better positioned to understand the kind of skills they need to bring to continue their work successfully in the workplace. I think there are a lot of people that don't know how to use a lot of technology. That doesn't mean they've tried or been trained to, or someone's taken time to help them understand and sort out why it's important. And I think sometimes we take technology out of the box and unplug it and give someone a manual and say, okay, start using this. And for most of us, that's not enough. We need help.
Yeah. I mean, you've had quite a tenured career, and it was interesting when you and I started working together again more recently. Of course, you spent some time, with Interplay, and we put you in VR for the first time. We were talking about Sims, right? And just to see your passion for it, and for someone who has your kind of tenure in the industry to have gone from what it used to be, from the books, and kind of the more manual processes, the more traditional education, to where it is now, where we're talking about simulations in VR. And I would say just probably about 25% of our customers now are using VR in some capacity. That's so different than where it was even 5 years ago, right? I'm just curious, what has helped you to make that transition, to be that flexible? You're talking about that anxiety and getting over that anxiety.
Well, I think you're asking me for a full confession. And in my second stint as a 30-something person, this is the second time I've gone through this odyssey of being in my 30s. I think about the answer to your question, and it's really amazing. When I started out as a book rep in the early 80s, we didn't have PCs. We had a Smith Corona typewriter with a correction cartridge. We used mimeograph paper to send carbon copies of our weekly reports in through the mail, and we had no phones, to speak of. We could call from a payphone, but we didn't carry a phone with us. We didn't carry a computer with us. We didn't have any computing power in the job at all. And we covered huge territories. And, then I think about it, and it's all we, come first, full circle. When I first became head of training and sales director at Wiley, I had the opportunity to meet Brad Wiley Sr., who was an icon and a patriarch of the Wiley legacy. And he was nearing his retirement. And he asked me, what my responsibilities were in the company. He wanted to hear how I was looking at things. And when I told him about the region that I was covering, I had a third of the country, he's like, well, that's where Esther and that was my territory as a book rep in 1936. And he described going to campuses, door to door in a 1936 Buick and leaving New York in the fall and coming back in April or May and just doing this long tour around the country. And then he would write a letter to the company to ask them to send a sample book to someone. And then that would go through the mail, and then someone would process that and send it. And you think about the delivery of that content now, it's monumental. But each time we move the needle, I think we have to be mindful of the medium. So in our first foray into digital learning and digital textbooks, I think it wasn't an unmitigated disaster, but I think we forced a solution where we hadn't identified a problem. And so what we did is we took analog books and turned them into the digital equivalent, and that wasn't how the medium was best used. So now I think when you look at learning tools from our former friends at Cengage or any of the e-learning companies that are out there, they're much more robust. They incorporate AI. They have analytics behind them to help us to see how a student's doing and whether or not they're accessing the material, how they're doing with it, where they're stumbling. I mean, it's so much more sophisticated now. But it all tells you the same thing. That only goes so far. And then the rest of it is served by a caring teacher, mentor, coach, professor. We still need that human interaction to learn in most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those hands-on skills too, that, of course, since trades is, I know, a passion for you and passion for us too. You need at some point, they need that hands-on skill, whether it's replicated or whether it's in real life.
I think that's right. And I think the paradigm is going to shift with AR and VR in ways that will benefit, Interplay, but other companies moving in that direction. And I think it's because when you look at the motor skills involved in certain jobs, a lot of times teaching those skills is better served in a VR environment than actually having a tech working side by side. When you're working with a tech side by side, you're encountering a problem on site at that moment. But that may not be the most common problem that new tech will face when they go out on their own. So having it in a VR environment where you have a prescribed curriculum where they're learning the best way to handle myriad situations, and they're also learning the motor skills. I always believed, and I still believe this, that if Ron Stefanski can use VR, no one on this planet will fail at doing it. I'll never forget going into the Interplay offices and putting on, the goggles for the first time ever. I never did video gaming. I never did any of that stuff. That's how ignorant I was about the technology a year and a half ago. And it's so powerful. And I can honestly say within about 15 minutes, I could see how it was helping. I could see, the interface and the interactivity with the buttons and the whatever you call them, the guns or triggers or whatever. I'm showing my ignorance already, but it was intuitive. So I knew I had to press this to move this, and I could flip this, and I could see the repair manual off in my left vision, and I could fix it there, and then go and play with something else to try to fix the HVAC unit. And I think I got it running actually when I was done with that tutorial. So I was proud.
That's awesome.
I think my dad would have been really proud. My dad was a skilled tradesman, and he knew everything about plumbing, electrical, and wiring, and he helped me to install a whole house air conditioning system in my first home years ago. And I think about that experience and how hilariously under-equipped I was to do those things. And now I think I would have had a different experience learning how to do them well. And I think the technology is just very impactful.
Yeah, we were at the International Builders Show recently with our friends from Home Builders Institute, and we had someone that was actually going through an HVAC troubleshooting scenario in VR. And when he went to stand up, he actually went to put his weight on the furnace in VR to help him to stand up, because his his brain was hijacked. He didn't realize that furnace wasn't there, right? So he wanted to stand up using the furnace and it wasn't there and he was fine. But it was, I think, just a really good example of how it does that immersive experience. It feels real and hijacks your brain. And if it's able to do that, in that kind of situation where you're trying to put your weight on something that's not there, it's able to also teach you in really powerful ways too. So obviously a fantastic tool as we try to bring this next generation into the workforce.
I remember being at a workforce conference and the CEO of Snap-on, Nick, was there, and he was telling the story about how they started selling Snap-on tools to mechanics in factories. And they had this case that had a green felt board that they pulled out of it, and then they put the tools on that. And the effect it created was that these tools were fine instruments to do fine things, like you'd think of dental, instruments or medical instruments. They were impeccably clean and on this velvet tray. And that's how they showed, millwrights and people in the factories what they had available. And they became very successful doing that. And I think what they knew instinctively in launching that company at that particular time was they knew about the dignity of work, and they knew the dignity of a skill, and someone who was a tradesman and was an artisan and craftsman. And I think they had deep reverence and respect for that. And I think that's what companies like Interplay are bringing back into our field of vision, is that these jobs need to be exalted. And one of the places where we're failing is with each of us as parents. We have to be able to look out there and say, skilled trades is really important. It doesn't have to be college. And we have to be able to say that about our own family members, because it's still the case that a lot of us say, oh, I think this is great. As long as, no, my kid's going to college. When I lived in Austria as an exchange student, the trades and apprenticeships were so advanced in many respects that there was equal respect for someone who was, a carpenter or someone in the lodging and hospitality business as there was for someone who went off to college. And I think we have to equalize that respect factor or that gravitas factor so that we endow those skilled trades professions with the same dignity that they deserve, that a college graduate deserves.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Well, I know we're running up on time. I want to thank you so much for your time today, Ron. This was so much fun. This feels like we have so many conversations like this where we get going and we just keep going for hours. So I'm so glad that we could have you on today.
It's been such a treat to be here. And I think for your listening and viewing audience, please reach out if I can answer any questions or be helpful, because I think this is both a disrupted time, but I also think it's an exciting time. And the more insight we can provide people as they navigate this disrupted world, the better off we'll all be. So I extend that offer to anyone who's been listening, and thank you for listening. It's been great being a part of this conversation.
And Ron, where can people find you if they want to hear more about your perspective or connect?
Yep, they can find me on LinkedIn, Ron J. Stefanski, and they can, and all my contact information is there on LinkedIn. My email, my cell phone, and my podcast. So you can find it all there. And please reach out and become part of the disrupted community. That's my little plug for my little world out there. But it's clear that many people are looking for answers to the really incisive questions you've posed today. And I think we have to keep elevating this kind of conversation to really bring help and direction and inspiration to people.
I agree. Well, like you said, Ron, thank you to everyone who listened in today. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out for our season, or rather for our episode 2 of this season, which will be coming soon. And will be posted on whatever your favorite social media platform is. So please keep an eye on Interplay Learning for more about that. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day.